Victims of Japan's forced labor file a new class action lawsuit in South Korea. A Japanese court okays the restart of a nuclear reactor, and justice may elude survivors of the Khmer Rouge. These stories are coming up next. This is the Asia Brief. A very good Thursday morning to you on this April 23rd, 2015. My name is Steve Miller, your host, and it's my pleasure to be here with you today, so thank you so much for joining me. Kicking things off today, victims of Japan's forced labor operations during the Second World War filed a class action lawsuit against 72 different Japanese companies in Seoul District Court this week. Those filing the suit are not only surviving victims, but members of surviving family members totaling 668 individuals. Defendants include ASO, Mitsubishi, Mitsui, and Nissan corporations. They're seeking a total of 10 million won each, which amounts to about $9,263 US. The case also falls on the heels of a 2012 decision that Japanese corporations must pay reparations despite a settlement made in 1965 when relations were normalized between Seoul and Tokyo. Quote, deposits of back wages and welfare funds for Korean victims of forced labor amounting to tens of trillions of won sit idle in Japanese Ministry of Posts and Telecommunications and the Japan Post Bank. We want the money we are entitled to, end quote, said the group's spokesman. Now, the group makes a very good point. After all, it is their money. Wages for the conscripted workers were put into these accounts, but never paid to them, and now they're just sitting there. So why not pay what's due? Well, unfortunately, that's where things get a little sticky. In 1965, Japan gave South Korea $800 million as payment in full for all wrongdoings past and future. It's a binding agreement that's still in effect today. The problem really lies on the South Korean side. You see, Seoul took that money that was supposed to go to the people and used it to develop the country. It also kept that payment secret. In 2012, the court decided to open things up and say that the government didn't have the authority to negotiate a final settlement on their behalf, which brings us to today. From Japan's point of view, everything has been paid in full based on that treaty, and truthfully, I'm inclined to agree. That was the deal that was struck. I think it was a bad deal for South Koreans, but nonetheless, that was the deal that was struck. Now, paying what's owed, especially since the money is essentially just sitting unused in these accounts, would be a very smart public relations thing to do, and in my opinion, truthfully, the right thing to do. But the question the victims still refuse to ask Seoul is why they never got their money in 1965. The Kagoshima District Court has cleared Kyushu Electric Power's Sendai nuclear power plant for restart. This decision means the company could activate the reactors as early as June. This seems to indicate that an earlier ruling enjoining a restart of another reactor was not in line with the prevailing feelings of the court. Upon hearing this news, shares of the electric company were up 2.5% after the decision. Since the 2011 earthquake, all of Japan's nuclear power plants have been offline, forcing the nation to rely solely on fossil fuels. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe wants to restart these plants to help reduce high energy costs and reliance on imported fossil fuels. As I mentioned in the April 15th edition of the Asia Brief, the public has lost faith in the industry and doesn't feel safe around these plants. If Prime Minister Abe truly wants to move forward and ease the nation back onto nuclear power, he needs to address the PR side of things and get the public back on his side. Failing to do that will mean repeated legal battles being fought over each and every plant, wasting everyone's time and money. For 20 years, Yuk Chang has documented the horrors inflicted upon Cambodia in the killing fields by the Khmer Rouge regime, and he and his team have contributed more than 500,000 documents to a United Nations sanctions tribunal tasked with punishing those responsible. However, police have refused to arrest 3 senior members of the Khmer Rouge charged with crimes against humanity, and it appears the police have the backing of Prime Minister Hun Sen. Even after a decade and a cost of $200 million, the tribunal has only sentenced 3. Yuk Chang said, quote, "Justice is a long and difficult road for all Cambodians. We do not want to do what the Khmer Rouge did to us. This has taken a lot of patience and forgiveness already." End quote. Speaking to Reuters News, the National Deputy Police Chief said the reason for not detaining these 3 accused is that the Prime Minister is worried this could tear the country apart and spiral it towards civil war. The Prime Minister, he himself a former member of the Khmer Rouge, vowed to prevent new indictments and said he would be happy if the United Nations left Cambodia. Human Rights Watch's Asia Director, Brad Adams, said, quote, "The United Nations was brought in to ensure judicial independence and that cases would be based on evidence instead of politics. But it is now clear that political interference means that this will never happen." End quote. In essence, what's taking place now is a mockery of justice. Sadly, I do think this is where things will end for the trials, despite millions of Cambodians still living with scars and terror-filled memories of that 4-year period between 1975 and 1979, when 1.8 million souls were killed. That's it for today. I hope you'll take a moment to leave your thoughts on these stories in the comments on Facebook or Twitter. To keep up with more news from the region, please follow Asian News Weekly on Facebook or Twitter. You can also send an email to the show with your questions, your comments, and your feedback. That email address is podcast@asiannewsweekly.net. If you enjoyed today's program, please share it with your friends, and if you haven't, subscribe. You can do that on our website, asiannewsweekly.net, or in your favorite podcast application like iTunes or Stitcher. Well, my friends, that is all my time for today, and one program note. I'll be taking a little time off next week, so there won't be any Asia Brief podcasts, but everything will return to normal next Friday with Asian News Weekly. And speaking of Asian News Weekly, that's coming up tomorrow. All right, my name is Steve Miller. Have a great Thursday, and until next time, remember to be true to yourself and to always be awesome.